Sir, I'd like to show you the newspaper clipping which is found at tab 31. You recall that you were asked some questions in relation to this document and taken through some of the contents. In this document, can I direct your attention to the paragraph that commences, "The Bishop responded yesterday to allegations by the Broken Rights Organisation." Do you see that?
Yes, I can.
And you go further and expand upon the response that's, or at least the article expands upon your response and provides a quote where you say that naturally it also seeks, this is a reference to the church, it also seeks to help those who are the perpetrators of such misconduct and will direct them to treatment and remove them from situations where they may put others in danger. And that's one of your direct quotes. Yes? That's a direct quote from you?
Yes, yes.
You indicated your deep sadness that the reputation of all priests and religious were tarnished with such allegations. And then you make the comment about it being all too easy to make allegations, but the presumption is sometimes that they're proven before an investigation has occurred. Having said all of that, to be fair to you, sir, you go on to indicate that we will be open with this problem. That's in the next column over. We will be open with this problem and we will do our utmost to redress the wrongs that have occurred. You see that?
Yes, I can.
And that's another quote of yours, yeah?
Yes, yes.
Is it, and I'm putting to you a characterisation of this article, is it the case that you were attempting to indicate that people should reserve their judgment pending the fullness of an appropriate investigation?
Sorry, I didn't hear the last part.
Was it your ambition with this article
Yes.
to encourage people to suspend their judgment pending a full and proper investigation?
No, I don't think so. I believe I was responding to the shock and the sadness and the dismay that was around me, that these things were being brought up and alleged. So I was probably trying to sort of be honest about acknowledging what had happened, but also addressing the pain of everybody.
What I'm suggesting to you is that you are dealing with both sides of the issues in this article. You're quoted as defending religious people in general from being tarnished by these sorts of allegations, but also indicating that the church will do its best to be open and supportive of the people who have been wronged. Is that a fair assessment?
I think so.
And this article, I think it was from February of '94. So these are the comments that you had expressed at that time based on the information that you had available to you. In the following 2 years, of course, you obtained further information, is that right? And you came to a more developed understanding of what you were dealing with. And is it correct that, with the benefit of hindsight today, you reflect back on the things that you got wrong as things you got wrong because you didn't know all the things you now know?
Yes, that would be true.
With time and more knowledge, you obtained a more nuanced and informed knowledge of the situation that you're dealing with.
Right.
Can I just take you back very briefly to tab 74? This is the statement to your parishioners that you instructed priests to read out and to publish in their newsletters, their parish newsletters.
Yes.
This is the statement that you've indicated you have some regret over.
Certainly.
You see the date?
Yes, 96 September.
Would you agree with me that this letter actually shows less understanding of the issues than the quotes attributed to you from 2 years before?
Yes, I would say so.
See, you say that you were getting more knowledge and your knowledge became better over time. Would you agree with me that this statement, 2 years after your earlier statement, is less conciliatory? Would you agree with me?
It's less.
Less conciliatory?
Yes, yes.
It's less encouraging to victims. It doesn't seek to hold out the interests of the church to people with legitimate claims in the way that your earlier comment did? You agree with all of those propositions? When you said in 94, that the church would be seeking to help those who are the perpetrators of the reported conduct, what measures were you taking at the time that you gave that quote to do that?
I don't recall any measures being taken at that time.
Is it possible that at that time there were no measures being taken?
Yes, it certainly is.
Did you seek to take such measures after the 11th of February 1994?
No, I don't believe so.
Why not?
Well, I've said before, I think it was part of my unfolding understanding of what was happening, and also just trying to understand where this help could be given.
You see, it appears from the words that are attributed to you in 1994 that in February of that year you understood the need for perpetrators of such crimes to have assistance and help. That you understood that then. Is it the case that, notwithstanding that understanding, you didn't seek to act upon it?
Well, my early comment in 94 was, I believe, of a generic nature, which I believed I would act upon that when the time came, but I didn't act any further after that. I didn't act at all.
Perhaps if tab 31 is returned to the screen, and just so you have the benefit, sir, of that quote, I'll just direct your attention to it. You'll see the paragraph that commences. Naturally, it also seeks to help those who are the perpetrators of such misconduct and will direct them to treatment and remove them from situations where they may put others in danger. Now, am I right in understanding your last answer that you were speaking to your general intention at some point in the future, but not at that point in time? Is that right?
Yes, that would be correct.
It gives the impression, doesn't it, that you're progressing efforts right now to deal with these issues. That's the impression your quote gives, isn't it? Is that the impression you intended to give?
Have your question again, please.
Was that the impression you were intending to give?
But I asked a further question before that. You said...
The phrase that, or the quotation that I'm referring you to, Bishop,
yes,
gives the impression that you were taking action right now, that is back on the 11th of February 94, to bring about this help and this correction.
Well, I believe I meant it in a more future generic kind of a sense than right here, right there and then.
Were you intending to say that you were committed to doing that?
Yes, I believe I was.
What would be required to occur for you to actually put that intention into action?
I believe the conviction of, the charging conviction of somebody with sexual offences. Time came to provide them with some kind of therapy or some kind of treatment.
So it was your position that you were not going to prejudge a criminal process, you would let it do its function and then take appropriate action. Did you think then that it was perhaps appropriate to investigate these matters independently of any criminal investigation?
I didn't think then, but I would think now that I would have done that.
But in fact, the protocol that reference has been made to, that you were a part of forming, refers to the concept of a person being called a notifier. Do you recall that term? A notifier?
Notifier.
Under the policy, do you remember that term?
Need to look at that again.
Perhaps if tab 37 can be shown, the second page of that tab. You'll see over in the third column under the heading Pastoral Action, there's a reference to the person who first receives the allegation, hereafter known as the notifier. You see that?
Yes.
So it was the case that notifiers under this approach were encouraged to record a free and full account given to them by an alleged victim or complainant. And, of course, you would have done that with the information you were receiving, even though you might not have been the first person to receive it. You would have made such notes. Is that right?
Yes.
And I understand at the bottom of that column, the notifier is endorsed not to contact the accused. Is that part of this desire to stay out of the official processes of investigation by police and the criminal justice system?
Don't believe so.
What was the purpose of that?
Might have to. I'm not sure, but I don't think it was to do anything like protecting the church or any person.
Right. It's just a provision that you're not sure what the purpose of is. Is that right? Can I take you to paragraph 25 of your statement? You will recall that this is the part of your statement in which you describe having Father Hines organise a meeting between yourself and Reg Durham.
Yes.
And this was sometime during 1994, was it? Or after 94?
It'd be after 1994. Maybe it'd be during 94, I believe.
Anyway, do you see the organisation of that meeting with that priest to be consistent with the protocol that I've just shown you?
As I can say, yes. See, yes.
You thought it was appropriate to meet with Father Durham?
Have that question again, please.
Did you think it was appropriate as the Bishop of Rockhampton
Yes.
to meet with Father Durham, who you knew at that point was an accused person?
Well, I thought it appropriate to have him meet with Father Hines, who was the coordinator of response.
You met with Father Durham on that occasion?
I didn't attend the meeting that Father Durham had with Father Hines. I met him and welcomed him to my house, and then I withdrew from that meeting.
Yes. So you were at the meeting.
No, I was not at the meeting. I was away from the meeting.
Can you tell us what you mean then by the words, at the meeting I explained to Reg Durham the reason for the meeting?
Oh, I'm sorry. I meant that prior to Father Hines and Father Durham discussing. I probably would have said what the meeting was called for.
So there was a meeting called with a person who had been accused of sexual abuse of children. You'd asked Father Hines to organise that?
Well, I organised it. I asked him to attend.
You organised the meeting?
It was at my house. Yes, I organised the meeting.
So do we need to adjust the first sentence of paragraph 25, where you say that you asked Father Hines to organise a meeting?
Well, I don't think it alters the situation that I would have invited Father Hines to come to that meeting at my house. I don't think it alters the sense.
So there was a meeting in any event between the three of you?
Yes.
And for a period of that meeting, you absented yourself from the room?
Yes.
Why?
Well, again, I thought Father Hines was the one I'd appointed to be the coordinator, so Father Durham might speak more freely with him, if I wasn't there.
About?
About the allegation.
Did Father Hines provide you with a briefing about what he said?
Well, it was a very short briefing, which didn't amount to very much at all. He just simply said that, yes, they'd had the meeting and discussed it, but he didn't indicate whether Father Durham had accepted responsibility or agreed to the allegation.
Did you ask him if he'd done either of those things?
I can't remember.
Did you make any notes yourself of this meeting?
I did not.
Do you believe that this process that you've outlined in paragraph 25 complied with the procedures of the Church at the time?
Well, I think it complied only as far as I understood the procedures at that time or the protocol at that time.
Did you excuse yourself from the room because you felt conflicted with regard to Father Durham?
I didn't hear you.
Did you excuse yourself from the room?
Yes.
Because you felt that you were conflicted over the allegations with Father Durham?
No, I believe it was because I wanted to have an opportunity to discuss the allegations between them.
Does that mean then that your view was Father Durham is unlikely to have felt free to discuss and be honest with you?
Possibly.
And is that something that was your assessment about your own relationship with him or your relationship as bishop with priest?
Probably relationship with bishop and priest.
So it was your assessment that it would be easier to talk to a fellow priest rather than the great boss, so to speak?
Yes.
All right. In deciding to conduct this meeting, did you consult with any of your colleague bishops in Queensland?
Definitely not.
Anyone throughout Australia?
No.
Did you seek advice from your superior?
My superior?
Yes.
Well, that's the Pope in Rome, so I didn't go that far.
Didn't go that far?
No. But
You didn't ask for a local cardinal's wisdom?
Well, as you understand, I think the bishop has his own area of responsibility subject to no other bishop in Australia, so it would have been to the Pope, which I didn't think appropriate then. I would have discussed it with my Vicar General, Father Noel Hines, obviously, but no, I wouldn't have gone any further.
Looking back on it now, do you see that the absolute power of the bishop can lead to errors of judgment that go unchecked?
I object, Your Honour. That is so vague as to leave this witness unable to comment on it. He's not agreed that there is absolute power in the bishop, and there is no suggestion of that in any of the evidence that's come up so far.
When you say that the bishop doesn't answer to others in the ordinary course, are you saying that the bishop has a wide range of discretion to act independently about how he will run his diocese?
Yes.
Looking back on those discretions with the benefit of hindsight, do you see any deficiency in that organisational structure when it comes to ensuring checks and balances against errors of judgment?
Yes, there certainly could be.
And would you agree that a bishop, whoever he might be, who doesn't have sufficient information, may not be in a position to have anyone correct their work, so to speak, when it comes to making a mistake with how to deal with victims of child sexual abuse?
Yes, I could agree with that.
There has been evidence led of your interaction with Bishop Malone, and you indicated that you had some anxiety over the fact that he had engaged in the issue without consulting with you. Is that a fair assessment of your position?
Yes, just as a courtesy. He had no responsibility to refer to me, but I just thought as a courtesy it would have been good if he had referred or had discussed it with me.
Did you find the bishop's correspondence to you helpful?
That to me, that correspondence, I'm just need to look at that again if I can find that Mrs. Bishop Malone's correspondence.
I think it's tab 65, thank you. First correspondence. Thank you. Did you see this correspondence? I'll just borrow that.
I did earlier.
Have you seen it before the Royal Commission?
Yes, I believe I have.
Do you remember when you first saw that letter?
No, I don't remember.
Can I suggest to you that it was around about the time 1996?
Yes.
And then I'll take you to tab 75. And this appears to be a letter addressed to you from Bishop Malone.
That's right, correct.
And you see that in this document, he talks of, in retrospect, having done the right thing, that being a reference to the previous letter that we showed you.
Yes.
And he speaks about why he thought that he was doing the right thing. Did you find this letter helpful to you?
I did, and I respected what he was saying and what he did.
And when you say that you respected what he was saying and what he did, what did it suggest to you you might do? Thank you.
I guess it was saying that he had met somebody who had been a victim of sexual abuse, and he had responded compassionately and with honesty, and that would be something I should do too.
Just go up to the top of that page. You see there the date, and you see it stamped as having been received on the 30th of September. And you'll recall that that was a few days after your letter to your parishioners decrying some allegations as having been scurrilous. Yes. Did this form a part of your change of view about that letter?
Could have done.
You, at various times during 1996, sought assistance on how best to handle complaints from alleged victims of child sexual abuse. Is that correct?
Could you put that question again, please?
I'll put it this way. You sought advice from Laurie Rolls, the Professional Standards Risk Management Service.
Yes.
And that was in relation to one particular complaint. But the advice that you were seeking was how to proceed. Yes? And in that advice, which is at tab 64, dated May the 1st, 1996, there's a specific portion of advice about media exposure. You see it says that on the second page, the fourth last paragraph, so far as media exposure is concerned, this is it, comma, one should not appear threatened by such suggestions. However, out of concern for the victim, it would be as well to point out the stress likely to be caused to the complainant if such a course were adopted. You see that?
Yes.
And you see the preceding paragraph that will give you some context for what's being spoken of. How did this advice figure into your drafting of your letter to your diocese in September of that year?
No, that did figure into my writing of that letter.
Is it fair to say that the first paragraph that you can see on the page there, the one that starts, it also understood that, I think it should say, it is also understood that, should the allegations appear to be sustainable, you would offer, and then it goes on to talk of a pastoral response without any admission of liability. That's advice that you're getting in May of 1996, and then in September of 1996, while one of your brother bishops is talking in a particular way to a victim, you are decrying some of the allegations as scurrilous. You accept that as the history. What I'm putting to you now is, would it have mattered what the advice is that you were given in 1996 to you?
Phrase that again? Or?
Did this advice have any bearing on your decisions as to how to proceed?
I'm sure it did.
You can see that this advice is more fulsome than the approach that you ultimately took. You can see this advice is tempered by the need to have a cautious regard, but a regard nonetheless, for victims. You accept that?
Not necessarily, no.
Let me put it this way then. Is there anything in this document or advice that would suggest you should go on the attack?
Should go what?
On the attack.
On the attack. No, I don't believe so.
Is there anything in this document that would encourage you to continue to make public statements of support for Father Durham or any other person who is accused of sexual assault?
No, there is not.
So you were receiving advice during the period of time where you have made some errors of judgment that you've properly and fairly conceded. Yes? And some of that advice I assume that you accepted, but you certainly didn't accept all of it, did you?
No.
And that was your choice, even though you were being informed with the best advice that you could obtain at the time. Could tab 94 please be displayed? So I have shown you during the course of my questions a document from 99, which was your reference to the court, and I've shown you documents from 94 and 96. I'm now showing you a document from 97, I understand. Is this your letter?
Yes, it is.
You see there that you are marking the occasion of Father Durham's resignation as a parish priest. Is it accurate to say that you are celebrating Father Reg Durham's career as a priest?
Wouldn't say celebrating, acknowledging, but not celebrating.
You're certainly at pains to express your gratitude to him for his service. And you're doing this in 1997 against a backdrop of what you by then well knew. Was it your intention to give the impression to members of your congregation that he was a good man fallen on bad times?
And was acknowledging that he was resigning his role on his 80th birthday and that he had served the people there as far as I could judge well.
It was not considered by you to be helpful to explore in this document the possibility that anyone who has relevant information might come forward and speak with you frankly and in confidence?
No.
You didn't think that it might be helpful to encourage such discussions?
I think there was another forum. This letter was directed to the community at Neerkol. I think there was another forum for inviting people to come forward with allegations.
That's one of the measures you took?
Mm.
And during the course of the period 1996 to 1999, did you cause any formal internal investigation into the allegations of sexual abuse of a child at Neerkol?
No, I didn't.
You would agree that that is a serious error for the person in charge of an organisation confronted by these sorts of allegations? You agree with that?
Possibly. I just need to think about the circumstances of those 3 years, but possibly.
Take your time to reflect on that.
Possibly.
It's not just possible, I would suggest. It's plain as day that it was an error on your part.
Can you state the issue again, please?
You didn't make any official inquiry into the allegations of child sexual abuse at Neerkol.
Neerkol was part of the responsibility of the Sisters of Mercy.
Right.
We had an appointed priest there.
Yes.
And I wouldn't have seen it my responsibility to instigate an inquiry there. Looking back now, I probably should have done so.
Right. Did you encourage the sisters to engage in such an inquiry?
No.
When the complaints extended from priests and into members of the laity, such as Mr. Baker, did you consider the need to have a wide-reaching and detailed inquiry?
No, I didn't.
To appoint an independent auditor to go through all the available records and to amass relevant information from living witnesses? You just did nothing. When you found out about Mr. Baker, you received a letter from him, is that right? In 1999, on the 23rd of March. Do you remember that? Tab 243. Do you remember receiving this letter?
Who's this letter from?
Mr. Baker.
Yes, I do remember.
And it's your understanding that Mr. Baker had been a resident at Neerkol and that he was there while he was a child and that he subsequently worked at Neerkol for a period of time as an employee of the Sisters of Mercy, and that there had been a number of complaints of abuse made about him by former residents of the facility. And in 1999 he wrote to you this letter, and you can see on the third page of that letter, scroll down, he speaks to his legal costs and he asks you to pay or to assist with his legal costs for his impending court proceedings. You see that? And you've told the Commission in your statement that you responded to that and refused that request. and you apologised that you couldn't assist him in any other meaningful way, but that he should perhaps avail himself of legal aid or the like. You said that, didn't you?
Is that letter?
Certainly, I think it's tab 246. See there that on the 1st of April 1999 you've replied. You indicate confirmation of the receipt of his letter. You express your deep sympathy for his difficult position, and you confirm or note his contribution, which was great, in your words, to the orphanage and Neerkol and the sisters. You then decline his request and express the thought that perhaps he should have sought legal aid. You see that?
Mm.
And then you explain that you haven't provided legal expenses for any persons associated with Neerkol who've made allegations against any person, which was another one of his complaints in his letter to you.
Yes.
And then you qualify the apology to which he's referred you giving on Queensland television by saying that your apology was intended as a general one and in no way directed to any individual. You see that? Is all of that correct?
Yes, I believe so.
You would agree that that is a different approach on the issue of paying of legal costs to the one that you adopted with regard to a member of the clergy?
Yes.
Why?
Because he's a member of the clergy and I have a responsibility to look after the priests, but not beyond that.
And what I want to suggest to you is that that was your primary motivation throughout the course of time that you were dealing with these allegations of child sexual abuse.
What is the primary?
Protecting priests.
No, that's not true.
Your interest was only partly to do with protecting the church. You wanted to protect your fellow priests.
No, I don't agree with that.
You would pay their legal costs to defend themselves in court from the allegations that we're talking about.
Because he was a priest of the diocese.
But if a person who helped and provided great contribution to the Catholic Church was not a member of the clergy, you would not have to provide for them.
That is correct.
Do you see that that approach of loyalty and fidelity to the brotherhood of priests places you, as the head of your organisation, in jeopardy of being blinded to potential conflicts of interest?
No, I do not see that.
As a fellow cleric, did you feel any conflict of interest when it came to dealing with issues concerning clergy whom sexual abuse of minors who had been accused of sexual abuse of minors? Did you think that Mr. Baker was in a completely different position because he was not ordained? Can I suggest to you that with your knowledge of the way in which sexual abuse had affected the church throughout the 90s, I'm talking about your knowledge in the 90s, that you must have been aware that anyone working for the church who abused a child would be seen as an agent of that church?
Well, that could be.
Well, you must have known that.
But they would still have their own responsibility for their conduct. And I'll go back to my original point that a priest of the diocese has a right to the care of the bishop in whatever circumstance he finds himself in.
And the protection of that bishop.
Not the protection, the support.
but no one else.
I don't think this is quite relevant because, if I may just digress to say, there are thousands of people, hundreds of people, thousands of people working in the name of the church who may become involved in illegal or sinful practices. The bishop is not responsible for all of those people, but he is responsible for the priests who belong to the presbyterate of that diocese.
With the benefit of hindsight, knowing all the things that you now know and having heard all of the evidence that have been given to the commissioners, and having listened to the commissioners' own questions of the witnesses, can you see how a bishop should consider himself responsible for those people?
Responsible for which people?
For all those people working in the name of your church.
Your Honour, I object. This is going far beyond the scope of the hearing and can't really be relevant to the questions which this Royal Commission needs to decide in this case study, how the bishop sees a responsibility for persons who aren't at all the focus of this case study.
I think Mr Kernaghan was drawing a comparison and endeavouring to highlight the proposition that he's put with respect to the conflict. If I've understood correctly where you're going, Mr Kernaghan.
Yes. I'll approach it more directly.
Thank you.
Sir, the responsibilities that you have as a bishop to the people who are working in the name of your church, you consider extend only so far as those who are ordained.
Yes.
What I'm suggesting to you is that if that is your approach, you place yourself into a position of conflict when you come to deal with allegations made against those ordained persons versus people who aren't ordained.
I don't see a conflict.
If your first responsibility is to your ordained brothers, are you not in conflict when there's an allegation about one of those ordained colleagues from a person who is not ordained?
There's no conflict there at all. I'm saying that the priest belongs to the diocese. The bishop is responsible for his priests. He can't be responsible for the people that work for the Sisters of Mercy in their hospitals and aged care, Catholic education, responsible in the sense of bearing a responsibility for legal costs.
Might be objected to in asking this question, but following on, I want to follow up with that concept that you've just advanced by asking you this. What does the word Catholic mean?
I beg your pardon?
What does the word Catholic mean?
Catholic means universal.
So it's universal within the ordained sections of the church, and everyone else is something else.
That's not true.
I just have a few last questions to ask you, sir. In relation to the trials that got underway, the criminal trials, did you or a representative on your behalf attend those trials?
Could I just ask which trials, please?
Any criminal trials against persons associated with Neerkol?
I'm not sure about that. I certainly did not. I'm not sure.
You remember asking for a report about the evidence of those trials?
No, I do not.
Did you ask to be given a copy of a transcript of that evidence?
Possible that the solicitor representing Reg Durham or whoever did give me a report.
Wasn't he representing Mr. Durham?
Beg your pardon?
Wasn't that solicitor representing Mr. Durham?
Yes, I think so.
Was he also representing you?
No, but he would have known that as a bishop I would have been interested in what was happening to one of our priests.
The question that I'm leading to is you would appreciate that this Royal Commission, one of its purposes is to bear witness to the stories of child sexual abuse throughout the nation. Do you understand that?
Yes.
In relation to the child sexual abuse that occurred in your diocese, how did you take steps to bear witness to the accounts given by complainants in a court of law?
Well, I think, as I said earlier, I regretted having written the first letter. I wrote a letter of apology at the beginning of 98, and I think I took each opportunity that came up to renew that apology and to express to the victims my sorrow at what had happened to them and their families and what had happened to the wider community because of that abuse.
I understand you're sorry for it, and I'm not questioning that. I'm not suggesting to you for a moment that you're not sorry.
Right.
What I'm asking you is when the opportunity presented itself through positive acts on your part to bear witness to the stories of the sexual assault complainants, many of whom are in this room and outside this room watching you now,
Yes. What
steps did you take to hear their story as they told it under oath in courtrooms in Queensland?
Could you suggest to me what you mean by steps?
I'm asking you, did you inquire as to what they said?
I wasn't involved in the court cases. I had heard some of their stories already. Obviously, they had told me.
You were the Bishop of Rockhampton.
I beg your pardon?
You were the Bishop of Rockhampton.
Yes, I am.
Surely you considered yourself involved, interested.
I was interested.
Did you seek to understand what words they used to describe the abuse that they had suffered?
I believe I did when the opportunity came up to hear their stories, and they had contacted me independently of the court cases that were going on.
The problem is, though, and I suggest to you that this is a problem, when you go around claiming that people are being scurrilous, many of those people who would have a complaint to raise with you might not come forward to discuss it with you. You accept that now, don't you?
I do, and I apologise again for that letter. As I said, I regret that I had ever written the letter, and I'll regret it to the end of my days, but it's too late to change that now, and I apologise to them.
It was the letter and the reference to court and the statement about Father Durham's resignation and your earlier comments about you'll do what you can to provide treatment for pedophiles but didn't actually do that. All of those things together are part of the systemic response by you to do nothing but defend a person accused of child sexual abuse. Do you agree with that?
No, I don't.
I've asked you this before, but I want you to consider it again.
Beg your pardon?
I've asked you this before, and this will be my last set of questions. I want you to consider this again. Did you consider that Father Durham was more than just a colleague, but a friend?
No, I didn't. I considered him as one of the priests of the diocese.
And he was no more special than any other priest in the diocese? And you had no particular reason to feel conflicted about having to deal with his case than any other?
No.
Did you take his confession?
No.
Did he
If I
take
did, I wouldn't
yours?
be telling you.
I'm sorry? What was
If
that?
I did, I wouldn't be mentioning it to you now, but we didn't have that sort of relationship.
Did he take yours?
That's not a question I'm prepared to answer.
Well, I'm asking you to answer the question, did Father Durham take your confession?
Not being asked about the content of it, Bishop, but just whether or not that was an activity that you engaged in, not what was said?
I would say no.
Did not.
Yes.
Thank you. Thank you, Your Honour, Commissioners.
No questions, Your Honour.
Start down at your end, Ms Wosley.
No questions.
Mr Clergy.
Thank you. Could you just help me understand the relationship between the Rockhampton Diocese?
Explain to Bishop Heenan your name and who you're acting for.
And I'm a barrister for AYK and AYO. They were residents in the latter period at Neerkol Orphanage up until when it closed. Two sisters. Could you just help me understand the relationship between the dioceses and the sisters? Just the formal apparatus of relationship and responsibility that exists between you as the Bishop of Rockhampton and the sisters. Do they enjoy autonomy, or are they subject to your directions? Could you just help understand the formal relationship?
Certainly. The Sisters of Mercy, or any religious order, is an autonomous gathering of religious sisters or brothers that exercise their ministry within a diocese. To exercise their ministry, they need the approval of the bishop, but they operate independently of the bishop in every other way. So they are separately organised, separately led, incorporated, but they are part of the diocese, but not sort of subject to the bishop's authority apart from his approval or permission to operate their ministry within the diocese. So the Sisters of Mercy in Rockhampton would operate 5 hospitals and aged care facilities throughout the region, but they operate those all independently of the bishop. I mean, there's cooperation and there's sharing of dreams and future hopes and so forth, but independence.
All right, so if there was an allegation of abuse about one of the sisters at the orphanage, would you have any power of intervention to investigate or explore the validity or otherwise of such a complaint?
Well, we have now a protocol called Towards Healing, which would be invoked, I believe, if the sisters were not operating or were not investigating themselves, that a bishop would have a responsibility. You would sort of be in contact with the congregational leader, the Mother Superior or the provincial of the order, and the bishop would negotiate, as I understand, with that person who leads the congregation as to where the process should go.
So that power would be persuasive only as the bishop endeavours to influence the outcome among the community of the sisters. Is that right?
Could you say that again?
Is the power, in effect, persuasive only?
Yes, I'd say so.
Right. Yes. And what about property? Is there any exchange of property or money from the dioceses to the sisters?
No, they operate completely independently. The property at Neerkol was owned by the Sisters of Mercy, and their own buildings, their hospitals and aged care facilities are all part of their own sort of resource. They're owned independently of the diocese.
And when it comes to a priest assigned to Neerkol Orphanage, as Father Durham was,
yes,
he would be reporting to you, is that so? And you have authority over him?
yes.
And he would be operating independently from the sisters. Do I understand that correctly?
Well, as I understand it, he was there as the parish priest of that area, the Neerkol parish it was called. The sisters were willing for him to be living in a house which they owned on the property, called the presbytery it was, and he would be, at their invitation, extending ministry to them, to the sisters, to the children, as well as ministry to the parish communities surrounding that area.
So that for any wrongdoing by Father Durham, do you accept any responsibility?
I would have to accept responsibility, certainly, yes.
And why do you accept that responsibility?
Because he's a priest of the Diocese of Rockhampton.
And how would you particularise any of your failings in the acceptance of that responsibility?
Sorry.
When you say you accept responsibility,
yes,
as a priest in your diocese,
yes,
what is it that makes you responsible?
Because when a priest is ordained, he makes a vow of obedience to the bishop of the diocese, then at his ordination, or any subsequent bishop. And as I said, in canon law and in canon law, that the bishop has a responsibility then to care for that priest to the rest of his days.
In addition to caring, do you have a responsibility to supervise?
Yes.
To make sure he behaves?
Yes.
So you accept responsibility then for the wrongdoings of Father Durham, insofar as you were his bishop?
Yes.
In relation to the evidence of abuse by the nuns, do you accept any responsibility as the bishop of the dioceses?
Well, I would say the first responsibility would be to the congregational leader, but I'm sure that there would be an interaction between the congregational leader and the bishop as to what process should be followed.
Thank you. Those are my questions.
Thank you. Mr. Kent.
Please, Commissioner, we have no questions.
Thank you. Anyone? Ms. McGlinchey. Yes.
Bishop, my name is Karen McGlinchey and I appear for Mary Adams, and I'd like to ask you some questions on her behalf.
I'm having a bit of a difficulty hearing.
I'll fiddle with this. Is that better?
I think so. I'd like to try, yes. Thank you.
All right. Please let me know if you can't hear me.
Yes, I will.
All right. So I'll just repeat what I said. My name is Karen McGlinchey and I appear in these proceedings for Mary Adams, and I'd like to ask you some questions on her behalf.
Certainly.
My questions on behalf of Miss Adams are around or about efforts to identify Father Johns, who abused Mary Adams when she was a child at Neerkol in 1962. All right. Now, you, I think, were either present in the vicinity of the court or would be aware of her evidence in relation to this matter. Just to summarise, that Miss Adams, when she was a child in 1962, was virtually left behind as a punishment at Neerkol while some of the other children were billeted out. It was a time when the nuns were having a retreat. The usual father, Father Anderson, I think his name was away, and a relief priest was staying in the presbytery. So you're aware of the general background of the...
I am aware of that, and I am accepting of what Mary has said.
In that time, a relief father, who she knew as Father Johns or Father John, attempted to rape her.
Yes.
Okay. Now, I understand that Father Johns has not been able to be, excuse me, identified. Is that correct?
That's correct, yes.
Now, you have said in your statement that attempts were made to identify Father Johns, and I'd just like to ask you some details about that. Can I just ask you, just get you to confirm that over the years you have had several conversations with Miss Adams about this matter?
Yeah.
All right. Do you recall in particular a conversation with Miss Adams in 1998 where you met with her at St Stephen's Church?
Yes, in Brisbane.
Do you recall that at that meeting Miss Adams had prepared a document which she wrote out what she wanted to communicate to you about that incident?
I don't recall the document, but I do very clearly recall the meeting, and I'm sure the document was there, but I haven't.
I'm not suggesting that she gave you the document, but she prepared it as an aid memoir for herself, and she read it to you so that she could be sure she'd included all the details.
Right.
All right. Miss Adams' instruction is that she told you a number of identifying features about the Father Johns. Right. Do you recall that she told you that the incident took place in approximately 1962?
Yes.
All right.
Not 62. Was it 62? Yes. 62. Yes, sorry. Yes,
1962.
Yes, sorry, yes.
Do you recall that she recollects that Father Johns was a blonde Caucasian man,
yes,
that he appeared to be, relatively young to her, and that he was a smoker? All right. Right. Do you recall that that she told you that the assault took place in the time, in a period where many of the children were away, and that the Father Johns was a relief priest? All right. Okay. Do you recall that she told you that prior to the assault on her, she had spoken to Father Johns in the company of 3 other girls?
Yes, I do, sir.
And she told you who those other girls were? Or at least one of them.
Sure about that.
You don't recall that?
I'm not sure about knowing who the girls were, but she did tell me that 4 of them got together.
All right. So can you tell the Commission what actions you took at that meeting to identify or to attempt to identify that Father Johns or Father John?
Well, I can only repeat what I thought I might have said somewhere before, that Father John Grace is the present Vicar General of our diocese, and I asked Father John Grace to check with religious orders as to any record that they had of a priest relieving at Neerkol or giving a retreat. And he came up with no answer to that question. Can I just add, if I may, that Miss Adams believes it was at a time of retreat for the sisters. I think if that had been true, a record would have been there with the sisters. The practice in the diocese and in most dioceses was that a priest went on holidays, he found someone to come and take his place, and there was no record of that put down with the bishop or in the diocese. It was just an agreement, and the only way you would determine perhaps if someone had been there, if they had celebrated a baptism for a child, and that would have been recorded with his name in the baptismal record. But there was nothing that could be found. So I'm very sympathetic to Miss Adams' strong request. She had a right to know who that was, but to the best of my knowledge, we have not been able to find the identity of that person.
Now, you knew at the time when Miss Adams spoke to you that she had also been to the police and that they'd come to a bit of a dead end.
Yes.
Also.
Yes.
That was why she had approached you.
Yes.
Can I suggest that there might have been some things that you could have done to assist the police in that investigation? I understand that the church had an archivist at the time.
Yes.
Did you make that archivist available to the church, to the police?
Well, I don't think I was aware that the police were making a separate inquiry, and I think it would have been normal for them to have gone to the archivist, as they did on other occasions, to ascertain the movement of priests. So, but no, I have to say I didn't become involved in that police investigation, and therefore I'm not able to say that I directed them to the archives.
You relied on the police taking the initiative to ask for access to the archives?
I don't think I had any contact with the police. I had imagined that came from Miss Adams.
Well, it did, but I think that Miss Adams had told you that the police had come to a dead end. Would it not be possible for you to have contacted the police and make your archivist available to them?
Well, it would have, yes, yes.
Did you consider doing that?
No, I didn't consider doing that, no. And it wasn't because I wasn't anxious to find Father John, but I just imagined that the police had exhausted their search, and we had too. But
do you know whether a search of the archives was ever conducted?
I don't. Oh, I imagine it would. No, I don't think it would have been, because it was a relieving priest, and no one knew the name.
It was a relieving priest, but he may have come from within the diocese.
No, not within the diocese.
How do you know that?
Well, we know all the Father Johns in the diocese, and we knew where they were.
Would it not be possible to go to records outside the diocese? I take it that there are some other archives that cover more than just your area?
Well, I'm certain there are, and we didn't take that action. No.
It's possible that the other girls who had a conversation with Father Johns might have known more about him than what Mary Adams did. Is that true?
Possible, yes.
Did you take any steps to have those girls contacted and interviewed?
I don't believe I knew who those girls were.
But you did know that other girls had spoken to Father Johns?
Yes, yes.
So you certainly knew that there was good reason to think that he existed.
Yes, I have no doubt that he existed.
Is it the case that the presbytery was available for people to just stay in without any records being kept of who they were there or why?
Well, it would be in the circumstance I tried to present, that a priest going away for a holiday would maybe write to religious orders, or maybe write to someone that he knew in Sydney or Melbourne, say, can you come up and look after the parish while I'm away? So that the priest who was there wouldn't just authorise anyone to go in. He would be trying to appoint someone who would stay there for the period of his absence.
That was Father Anderson, wasn't it?
Was it Father Anderson? Did you say 62?
Yes.
I think it was Father Anderson, yes. Yeah.
So it would have been Father Anderson's, you think, responsibility to get somebody to fill in for him?
Yes.
So it's likely that Father Anderson, who we now know is also a sexual abuser of children,
Yes.
found this man, Father Johns, to fill in for him. Is that the case?
I just understand that Father Anderson would have looked for someone to fill in for him, but no, I don't know any more than
yes. Was Father Anderson still alive when you had the conversation with Miss Adams about in 1998?
No,
he had already died.
No.
Commissioner, I seek leave to appear for AYB. I have requested...
Oh, yes, yes.
In
And
writing,
I have granted that application.
I have a...
Ms McGlinch.
Bishop, I also appear for AYB in these proceedings, and I have a number of questions for you.
Certainly.
Bishop, my friend Mr Kernaghan has asked you a number of questions, as has Council Assisting, about the protocol, so I won't go over that area. But I do want to ask you some questions about admissions by priests who have been accused of sexual abuse of children. You have had a long involvement with this matter with AYB.
Yes.
She first spoke to you she first attempted to speak to you in 1993. You met in 1994, and you've had a lot of involvement with this matter since that time. In that time, you also had a lot to do with Father Durham. You knew from 1994 what the allegations were. And my question is this: did you ever put those allegations squarely to Father Durham and ask him if they were true?
No, I didn't.
Why not?
Well, in the case of AYB, that I understood that AYB didn't want to push any charges and she had requested through me or to arrange a meeting with Father Durham, which happened in Brisbane, as we heard, and therefore I suppose I was respecting AYB and not sort of bringing the matter forward, as now, as I said before, in retrospect, I should have done, but I didn't actually confront him. It wasn't until another person came up, AYP, that I confronted him.
Bishop, in your role, with your responsibility, wasn't it a matter for you to find out what the facts were?
Could I ask you the facts?
Well, the facts including whether Father Durham admitted that the allegations were true.
Well, I understood that he did admit the allegations from the very word, from fairly early in the piece, because he seemed to say to AYB, why me? And it was all my fault. It wasn't your fault. I understood they were admissions to AYB.
But you didn't think that it was your role to put the allegations squarely to him and see what he had to say. And I'm just interested in knowing why you wouldn't feel that to do two things in 1994, didn't she? She did ask you to take some action. Do you recall what she asked you to do?
I think one of them might have been to do with her parents. Is that what you're referring to?
Yes.
Yes. Yes.
Do you recall what she asked in relation to her parents?
Well, I do recall that she was at one stage concerned that Father Durham was still exercising ministry, and one of them was to come to her parents and bring them Holy Communion.
Yes.
She raised the question of my telling him or stopping that happening, I think. But I thought it was her responsibility also to sort of say, whether that should happen, because she was so strongly aware that he was such a close friend and family member that I wasn't getting, I believe, a clear message from AYB to say, go and tell them and it'll all be over.
I'm not suggesting to you that AYB asked you to tell her parents the details of the abuse. I'm suggesting to you that she asked you, as the person with the responsibility, to take Father Durham out of her family, out of a situation where he continued to take communion to her family.
Well, I'm not sure I had that clear understanding of what AYB was asking. I think I probably would have thought to do that, it would have had to be revealed. The reason, because there was such a strong bond there, there'd have to be a reason to say, I'm not coming anymore to bring you Holy Communion.
Bishop, the strong bond was based on the grooming of a child and a fundamentally dishonest relationship between Father Durham and AYB's parents. Do you agree with that?
Yes, yes.
As the spiritual leader of the Rockhampton Diocese, how could you let that situation continue?
Well, I can acknowledge that it was wrong and I should have done something differently.
Father Durham continued to hear confession and Father Durham continued to take Mass to the public.
Yes.
AYB, that was the second thing that she asked you, to put an end to that. Now, wouldn't that have been the decent thing to do?
I can't remember that she asked me directly to put an end to that. I would have to check up on that, but I can hear what you're saying, and it all should have stopped, but it didn't, and I regret that.
Even if it wasn't asked, it should have been an action that you should take on your own.
Yes, I agree.
Bishop, just going back to the question of admissions to priests, can I just ask you two questions?
Yes.
In your years as a priest, have you ever given evidence in a criminal trial for the prosecution against a priest?
No, I don't believe I have.
Do you, in your long years of experience, know of any other priest who has given evidence in a criminal trial against another priest?
No, I don't.
Do you think that there is or there was in your time, a practice of avoiding at any cost hearing about an admission of sexual abuse by a priest?
Could I ask you the question again?
I'm sorry, yes. During your time as a priest, which includes your time as a bishop, would you agree that there was a practice whereby priests would avoid being in a situation where they may hear an admission by another priest that they had sexually abused a child?
I don't believe so.
I object to that. It's very difficult for this witness to answer that because he would need to go into the mind of all the other priests around to know what they were thinking. It's not of any assistance, I would submit, even if he were able to answer it.
Bishop Heenan can only answer about his own knowledge, and I would understand that's the basis upon which the question's being put to you, Bishop Heenan. Do you want that question again?
Yes, please.
Bishop Heenan, what I'm asking is, in your experience as a priest, which includes your time as a bishop,
Yes.
did you understand that there was a practice of priests, including yourself, avoiding hearing any admissions by other priests of sexual abuse of children?
No, I don't believe so.
You don't believe that there was a practice?
No.
When you met with Father Durham, there was a conversation. Do you recall the other father who was there? I'm sorry, I just don't recall it at the moment.
Father Hines?
Yes. Yeah. You met with Father Durham and Father Hines at a time when AYB had requested to meet with Father Durham. Do you recall that? Right. You arranged a meeting with Father Durham and Father Hines. You met in your home. Right. Could you tell us what happened at that meeting?
Well, simply that the time was arranged for Father Hines, who was from Bundaberg at that time, and Father Durham to come in, and I welcomed them at whatever time it was, and then I would have said that there was an issue come up for Father Durham that needed to be addressed, and I'd asked Father Hines, as the person I'd requested to look after sexual abuse issues, to discuss it with him. And I said, I choose now to leave the room and leave the discussion to you both. So that's how that happened, and I was probably away for an hour, maybe less, and they would have told me they had finished their discussion.
Why did you leave the room?
Well, as I tried to say before, I think I believe that I had appointed Father Hines as a fellow priest who knew Durham a lot longer than I did, but also I think as a bishop I felt uneasy at that stage, being the direct person to confront. And again, I would do it differently now, but I did it that way.
Can I ask if you left the room so to avoid hearing or potentially hearing an admission from Father Durham?
No, I didn't.
Bishop, you gave some evidence earlier that after the allegations were made by AYB, Father Durham continued to, or he taught children in a school, in religious studies. I think you said in a small public school.
Yes.
How did that come about?
Well, because that small school was in the parish of Neerkol, and boys and girls in all of the schools throughout the diocese always had someone come and visit them each week with a religious instruction lesson, and it was happening that Father Durham was going there for that purpose.
Had Father Durham been in that position prior to you hearing the allegations by AYB?
I believe so.
Did you consider removing Father Durham from that position when you heard the allegations from AYB?
No, I didn't, unfortunately.
Did you consider disclosing to the principal of that school that serious allegations had been made against Father Durham?
No, I didn't.
Disclosing that to her would have been the right thing to do, I suggest.
But I'm sorry.
Disclosing that information to the principal of that school would have been the appropriate thing to do.
It would have been, but I would have acted altogether differently had I been aware of the danger and wiser. I would have prevented his ministering at all, but you're right in saying that.
I'm sorry to be jumping around in time. When you first met with AYB, did she tell you that she had made an earlier disclosure of the abuse by Father Durham?
She did.
Did she tell you that she had, quite some time before then, in 1983, made a disclosure to Archbishop Rush?
Yes, she did.
Did she tell you that Archbishop Rush said to her, words to the effect, it was Reggie, wasn't it?
Yes.
Did that suggest to you that Reggie Durham had a reputation for sexual abuse of children?
Well, I suppose I would have wondered.
You would have wondered? Or
Would
you
have
did
wondered,
wonder?
like, if it went back that far, 1982, whether there was a reputation.
Now, I understand that Archbishop Rush had passed away by that time, by 1994.
Yes.
Did you try to explore that issue any further to find out if there was any records of that conversation or if there were any records of prior matters involving Father Durham?
No, I did not. No.
You just left that?
Yes, yes.
All right. I have nothing further. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms McGlinchey. I'm not sure if you want to start now, Ms Needham, or I don't think there's anyone else. Is there anyone?
I think there's only me, and looking at the time, Your Honour, I don't think I'll get
A couple of minutes before we'll finish for the week, so it makes more sense. It makes more sense, I think, to
take it all on Monday.
to stop now and start at 10 a.m. on Monday morning. So Bishop Heenan, I'm just indicating to Ms Needham, who has some matters that she wants to put to you also, that rather than starting now with just a couple of minutes before we rise for the day, that she'll commence on Monday morning with you. So you're required to re-attend for commencement at 10 on Monday morning.
Thank you, Your Honour.
Thank you. So we'll adjourn until 10 on Monday.